Hello and welcome to another episode of Just a Few, a place where you can come to find answers to some of your biblical questions. My name is Patrick Antoine, your host and Bible teacher. Thank you for joining me. And if you have a question that you may want to have a biblical response to, please feel free to submit it via email to the email address on the screen now, and I'll try to provide you a response. Let's go to today's question. It has to do with a death in the Old Testament, the death of the first king of Israel, King Saul. The question is a very simple one. How did King Saul die? And the reason why, of course, the person is asking the question is because when you read the accounts in the Bible, you would almost be tempted, and justifiably so, to think, is there some form of contradiction here? And people always are quick to find contradictions in the Bible or apparent contradictions. So let me read the two passages, the two accounts, and use up most of my time reading the passage, and you'll see where the question comes from, and then I'll give you my explanation. 1 Samuel, the last chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 31, we'll read the first 6 verses where it tells us there how Saul died. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me or defile his body." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together that same day. So based on this passage, Saul committed suicide after being wounded in battle on Mount Gilboa. But when we turn the page and we go to 2 Samuel chapter 1, the very next chapter, and we read there a lengthier passage, so let me try to read as quickly as I can. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag. On the 3rd day, behold, it happened that a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. So it was when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to him, "Where have you come from?" So he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." Then David said to him, "How did the matter go?" Meaning the battle. "Please tell me." And he answered, "The people have fled from the battle. Many of the people are fallen and dead. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also." So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead?" Then the young man who told him said, "As I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear, and indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. Now, when he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' So I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' He said to me again, 'Please stand over me and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me.' So I stood over him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them here to my Lord." What's happening here? This guy said he killed Saul because Saul asked him to do so. Well, you need to understand what's happening here. There's no contradiction here. The Amalekite young man was lying to David, that's all. He thought that he could ingratiate himself to David, who was going to be the new king, by telling David, "Hey, I killed your enemy." Because for many years, Saul was after David, and people thought that David would have been wanting to kill Saul. And the young man thought that he would have been doing himself a favor by bringing news to David. Here's the crown. I killed Saul, and David was probably going to give him a reward for killing Saul, his enemy. David had no such feelings towards Saul. In fact, David was very grieved when he heard that Saul and Jonathan were dead. And this young man was lying to David. In fact, that would have been the last lie he told in this life, because David ordered his execution for killing the king. And there is no contradiction there. That's what happened. In fact, the chronicler in the book of First Chronicles gives us a sort of the rest of the story to let us know the full picture behind how Saul actually died, or why he died, in First Chronicles chapter 10. And let me read a couple of verses there for you in closing. The Bible says, so Saul died for his unfaithfulness, which he committed against the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord. In other words, when Samuel had sent him in 1 Samuel chapter 15 to destroy the Amalekites, same people, this young man who came there should not have even been alive. All of the Amalekites should have been wiped out by Saul a long time before, but Saul didn't obey God completely, because he did not keep the word of the Lord, and also because he consulted a medium for guidance. That's what 1 Samuel 28 deals with. But he did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he, meaning the Lord, killed him, or brought about his death, and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. So ultimately, the sovereign Lord killed Saul by allowing him to die on the battlefield that day. It wasn't that Amalekite young man. He was a liar, hoping to get into the graces of King David, or David who was about to become king. So there's no contradiction there. All we have is a lying deceiver who was hoping for some favor, but all he got was his own execution. My name is Patrick Antwine. Thank you for the observation and the question. Hope my response helped you there. Until the next time,